Paul?
Yes, thank you very much, John. We had our first ever virtual happy hour district awards program last night. This is our third year of the awards program, and we usually have it at the Conference of Clubs, but that was canceled this year. So we did this instead, and it was a lot of fun. We did record it, so if you're interested, you can go out to the district's website and find that, or I don't think it's up yet, but I can share it as well with John.
That'd be great, thank you.
Yes, and with the awards, the eClub was first in per capita giving to the Rotary Foundation, and second in overall giving. And because of those two, tied for second place overall for Small Club of the Year. So congratulations.
Yay. All right. Congratulations, eClub. Thank you so much. It was really exciting when I heard the news this morning. So thank you. Also, if I can just say, this is your last week as district governor. You've survived. You've done it. You've led us through this tumultuous year, let's just say. And any final parting words? Actually, I think next Wednesday is July 1st, so you will be out of your tenure. So any parting words that you'd like to offer to the group?
For sure, it's been a great year. We're kind of doing a wrap up next Wednesday. It's at our regular Prior Lake Rotary Club meeting. It's going to be the Friday feature. Usually the district holds some kind of program every Friday at 9 a.m. Next week would be July 3rd, so we don't think many people would be there. So I decided to move it to Wednesday and call it a special Friday feature on Wednesday.
On Wednesday, yeah.
And because it's a special day, it's a special time. So 8 a.m. to 8:30, we will kind of do a wrap up. Myself, District Governor-elect Ed Merrick, and Kenny Closter and Dale, who are also part of the District Governor line. And so I invite you all there to join in, and we'll do it. We're doing hybrid meetings right now for Prior Lake Rotary Club. Today was our third one. So we're meeting in person, but also we have Zoom available. So we found that we actually have more who are meeting in person, but overall we have more attendees than before COVID hit for the in-person. We're averaging right around 60 people, and we were 40 to 45 when we were meeting live. So it's been a good thing, and it's allowed us to keep people connected. So I invite you to that, and I will put the link in the chat box so you can register. We'll record it just like you record these. We always record it, put it on the district's YouTube page. Before that, on the 29th is Ed Merrick's installation, District Governor-elect. And I know he's got close to 100 people already signed up for that. So come join us for that. Again, virtual, not live. But my year has been, the year as district governor has been very rewarding. And the best part is just being able to see more of what the clubs are doing and really meeting people, so many more new friends in Rotary that I have. And, you know, people say there's the past district governors, there's no regrets, you know, and I definitely feel that way. It's been a great year, and yeah, I've just really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for all your service, Paul, for leading us this past year, and for being just a diehard supporter of the eClub. Our thanks. All right, just a couple of quick, and I'll push through these here because we're running a little over on time, but the district goal of 400,000 for the annual fund is getting very near. As of today, 370,500 for Rotarians. If you've not yet, of a formal club, if you've not yet donated, you can do that at rotary.org. Log in, click on the donate button, and click on the annual fund button. If you're a non-Rotarian and would like to make any sort of a donation to the annual fund, which goes for polio, which we're talking about next week, which goes for both district and national and international projects. You can donate right here to the eClub today during the meeting, tinyurl.com/eClub donation. Kirk, we can get all of any donations that happen to come in today. Let me know, and we can do a single, donation to the annual fund.
Okay.
All right, it's put down here on the eClub donation. Make sure to click on the special instructions and note Rotary Annual Fund if you would. Become an eClub member. I say this every week. So for anyone who's new, our dues are $25 a month or $270 if paid up front for the year. We have some new member cleanup to do before the 30th here. Paul, thanks for keeping me on track with that. So we'll get all of that taken care of by the end of the Rotary year here next Tuesday. And Paul, you mentioned the Friend program, supporting eClub Friends. So if you are a member of another Rotary Club, and become a supporting eClub Friend for $100 and help out a new growing Rotary Club and come and attend our meetings and get unlimited makeups. So join us next week for our speaker, Tim Murphy, very involved with the End Polio Now program, Polio Plus. He's coordinator for 16 districts of Zone 29. Some of you know what that means. I do not. It sounds very important though, and we'll find out next week. And the topic is polio, Rotary's #1 cause. And I know there will be some talk about the impact of COVID and how polio, our efforts as Rotarians to end polio and how that's taken a temporary, pause here and how we'll continue on. So join us next week. And with that, this week's speaker, Glen Blumhorst, President and CEO of the National Peace Corps Association. I just have to say, just on a personal note, Glen, thanks for taking the time to be here. You are, I'll call you our VIP for joining. Peace Corps is such a program. So excited about your program today and to hear more about it. Chrisanne, did you have an introduction at all? You didn't for this week. And we're running, normally we would do a little more detailed introduction. Glen, I think I'll just let you do that this week. My good and new is a good and new idea, but it put us over on time. So yeah, without any further ado, I will unshare my screen, and then Glen, if you have a presentation, you can share that. And if you don't, you can just speak.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, John. And thanks especially to Chrisanne for reaching out to me. I think I spoke at, I believe it was the Northfield Rotary Club maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, and somebody must have picked up on that and said, well, there's an eClub as well. And so I really appreciate being a part of your meeting. I've done a lot of Rotary meetings now, more than ever. Everything's virtual. And it's just, I don't know for most of you if it's the same, but I'm moving every day, probably between 6 or 8 different meetings. I just came from a meeting on the West Coast, and I was earlier in a meeting with the Peace Corps director herself and others. It's just amazing how efficient, I guess, we can do things electronically. So kudos to you for having the foresight to get an eClub in place, and you're well equipped for the times, I guess. But thanks so much. And again, as a point of introduction, and by the way, I want to make sure I stay within your time limit. Do you wrap up completely by within a half an hour? Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Honestly, usually we go over. So yeah, okay. But if you have a 20-minute, half-hour presentation with Q&A, and some people, feel free to drop off if you need to, but make your presentation and we can stick around for some questions, but want to be, just respectful of your time as well. So we can stay late if you can stay late, otherwise, go from there.
Well, you're my last meeting of the day, so
all right.
It's no problem. I can stick around as long as you want, but I do, again, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And I know that what we'd like to do here is kind of create a linkage between Peace Corps itself and Rotary. And I'll get into a partnership that we have there as well in the future down the road here a bit. But I'm going to be sharing just, in the background here from time to time, some different shots from my Peace Corps experience. Right now, I went back to my village, San Miguel Chica, Baja Verapaz in Guatemala. And I was in a small indigenous village, which was about a population of probably 4,000 or 5,000 itself. And then the broader population of this indigenous group was only about 20,000. So we spoke Rabinal Achi here, which was a dialect really particular to that area. I was a crop diversification volunteer, meaning I worked with farmers, but most of the farmers and small entrepreneurs that I worked with were women, because in this part of the country, the civil war that was going on at the time back in the late 80s had pretty much either disappeared or killed most of the males in our community. And so there were a lot of widows and a lot of orphans in the local orphanage. And these are some of the friends that I made and women that I worked with in women's groups there in that small village. But Peace Corps itself, for me, was a very formative part of my life and my career. All of us will say that it transformed our lives in one way or another and totally changed our perspective on things. I know that I heard Peace Corps mentioned once there by Vicki. I think it was a niece or nephew that had served in the Peace Corps. I'm gathering that none of the others yet have served in the Peace Corps yet. So you'll have the opportunity. There's no upper age limit, but it is really just a fascinating opportunity to really broaden your horizons and change your perspectives on life and the world, and the worldview and the values I think that we gain from that experience are just immeasurable. So I am very strongly supportive and encourage any type of intercultural international exchange programs and opportunity for our youth in particular to be able to spend time immersed in other cultures and peoples and languages. It really just can go so far in creating bridges of understanding these days. So after Peace Corps, which I did actually serve in beyond the normal 2 years, I served for 3.5 years. I did stay in Guatemala for another 3.5 years. Total time then in Guatemala was 7 years, and my son was actually born there. And we moved back to the U.S. after that, and we're in the U.S. for a few years, and then ended up moving to Bolivia. And I spent 10 years of my life and career in Bolivia, pretty much raising my kids there and working on small community development projects throughout the country of Bolivia as well. So overall, I think, and with some time in Colombia, that the country of Colombia that I lived there, I was in Latin America more than almost 20 years, I guess, and then worked around the world with an organization called ACDI VOCA for another 4 or 5 years based out of Washington, D.C. So really the international arena is where I feel so comfortable doing my work and serving others. So it's so important to be a part of an internationally oriented organization like the National Peace Corps Association and Rotary itself, Rotary International. And so with regards to National Peace Corps Association, just to kind of clarify, the Peace Corps itself, as you may know, is a federal agency. It's funded by congressional appropriations, and it is the agency that is responsible for fielding volunteers overseas, recruiting and fielding them and taking care of them, and then bringing them back after their service. Once their Peace Corps service is complete, though, they become a part of the National Peace Corps Association and what we call the greater Peace Corps community. And that community right now numbers about 245,000 of us that share the Peace Corps experience, either as volunteers, most of us as volunteers, and in some cases just as staff. So we are, a pretty significant part of the community, of the landscape here in the United States. Our returned Peace Corps volunteers, as we call them, dot the landscape around the country, and I'm sure that you've probably run into them in your everyday walk of life there, because I think the number is now something like 1 of every 1,500 or 1,700 people in America is a returned Peace Corps volunteer. So they're the mayors, they're the governors, they're the members of Congress, they're the teachers, they're the scientists, astronauts, you name it. If you watch Netflix, you'll know probably that the founder and owner of Netflix is actually a returned Peace Corps volunteer himself. At any rate, it is something that for all of us changes our life and sets us on a course of service throughout, I think, our lifetime beyond that. And that's why Rotary is so important to us. And many of us as returned Peace Corps volunteers have made that transition back to the United States and into Rotary as a means of continuing our service. And really, you know, the fact that I think Rotary clubs are connected at the local level with Rotary clubs in other countries and are supporting many times projects that are at the grassroots level, it really does provide for us that continued pathway back to communities that we served in and communities around the world that we feel we can continue to make a difference from, whether we move on to become teachers or business folks here in the U.S. or whatever it is, that connection there can still remain through the Rotary clubs. And Rotary International and Peace Corps itself, the agency decided about 4 or 5 years ago that it was important also to try to promote mutual service, if you will, service in the Peace Corps on behalf of Rotary clubs and service in Rotary through on behalf of the Peace Corps community. And so there is an umbrella MOU, a memorandum of understanding between the two, the federal agency and the Rotary International. And the idea is there to simply promote each other, mutually promote our values and our call to service, if you will, in Peace Corps as well as in Rotary. And then as part of National Peace Corps Association's network of affiliate groups, we also established a Rotary Peace Corps partnership called Partnering for Peace. And it is a formal affiliate group of the National Association. And this is a group that was formed informally, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and then affiliated with the National Peace Corps Association. And we're all about promoting as well returned Peace Corps volunteers becoming involved in Rotary groups back here in the U.S. when they come home. So we believe, of course, that there are such really common values and the commitment to service that transcend the two communities, if you will. And it's really important for us to find opportunities for returned volunteers to engage in international service. And what better way than with the local Rotary clubs and Rotary International to do so. So this partnership between our community and the Rotary community is strong and getting stronger. We're continuing to develop ways that we can work together. But really, I'd love to see the screen here in 2 months or 2 years and see that 3 or 4 more of you have served in the Peace Corps. And I'd like to look at the screens that I'm looking at of returned Peace Corps volunteers and see all of them engaged in Rotary in their local communities, because there's just so much that we can gain from being involved. One of the things that National Peace Corps Association does, just to also add a little bit about our mission, we champion lifelong commitment to Peace Corps ideals, as we say. And we have 3 kind of strategy areas that we focus in. The foremost one is advocating for Peace Corps itself and its funding and legislation related to the Peace Corps. And right now, this is a pretty significant area for us because the Peace Corps, as many of you know, due to the COVID situation, did have to suspend programs in every country around the world. That was about 62 countries at the time, where around 7,000 volunteers. All of the volunteers back home, back in March, brought them back safe and sound to the U.S. Under a lot of kind of trauma, if you will, in a disrupted service situation that they were in, and an environment here that was so uncertain in terms of what COVID meant and the impact of the pandemic. So right now, Peace Corps has 0 volunteers in the field, which has never been the case since 1961. It peaked out in the late 60s at around 15,000 volunteers in the field, and over the last 10 years or so, held pretty constant around 7,000 volunteers. And it could have been much larger than that, but the federal funding just wasn't there for Peace Corps. Congress has never appropriated much more than just enough money to have about 7,000 volunteers, though the application rate for those 3,500 slots each year is in the ballpark of 15 to 20,000 applicants a year. So a lot of opportunities for continued service that are lost there because Peace Corps doesn't have the funding to field all of the qualified applicants that they would like to put out in the field. But with no volunteers in the field right now, and I think what we would expect to see as budget battles ahead, as Congress starts looking at where they can trim the budget in the fiscal situation that we'll be in. I think we fear for Peace Corps' future. It's reaching its 60th anniversary next year, and we do believe that it is an extremely precarious situation right now. And so we are calling on our community to mobilize at all levels for grassroots advocacy efforts, and really to make sure the members of Congress know how important the Peace Corps is, not just to other countries and the work that we do, but to our global community that we live in, and even more so, I would say, bringing the world home and creating that better understanding of other countries here on the part of Americans. And so, we would certainly welcome Rotary members to also make sure they're members of Congress about the value of Peace Corps. And again, like I said, that is risen to be our foremost priority right now, is to ensure the future of this great institution that we believe must continue its mission. We also have other work that we do. We are much like Rotary in that we're organized in kind of chapters, if you will. We call them affiliates around the country. We have 180 affiliates around the country and around the world, basically. And those are right there in Minnesota, for example, is the Minnesota Return Peace Corps Volunteers. Down in Iowa, it's the, I think, Des Moines area Return Peace Corps Volunteers, and so forth. And those groups are really kind of the on-the-ground ambassadors for the Peace Corps, and doing the work of bringing the world home and telling our stories, and promoting social justice and peace and other issues right here, at home. But they're also very much involved back in their countries of service as organized groups too. And one of the things that we do is just simply help build that network of community groups around the country and around the world, and then help those groups continue to have their impact around the world. One of the things that we do as part of our third pillar of effort is also support Peace Corps volunteers. When we do have volunteers in the field, we support their projects with financial grants to them, as I do know Rotary does, and many Rotary clubs do support individual or Peace Corps volunteer projects when volunteers are serving. And what we have found ourselves doing when the volunteers were evacuated was really they had no way to continue their projects that were started under the Peace Corps Partnership Program. So we have now funded about a dozen projects of return, or I should say evacuated Peace Corps volunteers that are now here in the US and remotely completing their secondary projects like school latrine constructions, or small plant nurseries, or those sort of projects that they were working on before they left. And this is really important for us because by doing so, we're helping these volunteers to show their continued commitment to these communities, because many of the communities where volunteers were serving felt abandoned. They felt, well, all it took was, a little pandemic and the Peace Corps pulled out and they left us, and here we are. But, these volunteers, and actually some of them are actually going back already to some of their countries of service on their own and working on these projects. But most of them, of course, remotely through the work that they have and the partnership organizations that are on the ground, they're simply continuing to do their work. And this is a fascinating thing to see, because that keeps this Peace Corps spirit alive in these communities. It shows a sense of commitment that we're not going to abandon those communities that we were working in. And as soon as the volunteers can go back, they will do so. So the question there too is when that might happen. We don't expect volunteers back in the field before October. Peace Corps is still recruiting, but they're recruiting for kind of a holding pattern, if you will. So anybody that is recruited at this point will not necessarily be assigned a country or invited to a country, nor will they be assured to go back to the country that they served in if they're being reinstated. But we are hoping to see the first volunteers redeployed in October if the conditions permit, in a limited number of countries. And then we would expect and hope that by this time next year, we would see the numbers of volunteers significantly rising. But it will probably take 3 or 4 years before the numbers of volunteers get back to even close to the numbers that we've had, around 7,000 for the last several years. And this in itself puts Peace Corps in a very precarious situation because, again, budget battles and political influences and other things that could go on could really put it in peril. So our community is so important right now to really be advocating to Congress and even the White House about the value of the Peace Corps and to continue it beyond the 60 years that it'll celebrate next year. So in the meantime, I think one of the important things that we see volunteers doing that were evacuated in particular, and even the return volunteers that are part of our community, is they're diving right in and helping out with COVID response, almost from day one when they came back. We have seen a number of return volunteers start small organizations, if you will. There's one started by Macedonia volunteers that were evacuated. I think they call it RPCVs, serving at home. And they just started producing masks and giving them away to different state and local entities and others and sending them around the country. There have been small businesses that have sprouted up from RPCVs who want to work in any way, supporting community level efforts in COVID response. Many of us, including myself, are volunteering in food security areas such as the food banks and other places where we feel that we can make a difference in helping, provide for the food security issues particularly for the populations that are most vulnerable. And then a large number of our return volunteers right now are engaging in either volunteer or paid COVID response through contact tracing. So it is, it's really all about what our community does is we see the opportunity to continue our service in any fashion, and that's what we're doing. So I'm really proud of the fact that those values that our volunteers bring back to the U.S., really are so important to them. And I know that not only will keep them engaged in COVID response activities and probably when they go back overseas as Peace Corps volunteers, very likely that volunteers in those countries are going to be working on the front lines of COVID response in those countries as well too. That's what Peace Corps does. They put volunteers on the ground, usually the first ones in on the front lines where they can help local strategies and local plans to address these issues. So global health is going to be a major, I think, focal point for Peace Corps going forward. But we're a community of impact, and we can only amplify our impact if we're involved in organizations like Rotary. And so for us, I hope to see more and more individuals join this e-group as well. And I hope that we can do our part at National Peace Corps Association to promote it and promote the clubs around the country. And part of the reason I joined Rotary myself was to set an example of the importance of being engaged. So I'll wrap it up there, and I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions about anything regarding the Peace Corps, the current status of the Peace Corps, volunteers, Guatemala, National Peace Corps Association, or anything that anybody would like to know more about.
Thanks so much, Glenn. I led the meeting off saying that District Governor Paul had led us through tumultuous times, and you had the same run of bad luck, I guess, or you've been there, and what a year to be president and CEO of Peace Corps. So yeah, thanks for everything you've done and getting all the volunteers returned home safely and leading for a redeployment of people. None of it can have been easy. So, our North Star Youth Exchange here does about 65 students inbound and outbound a year. 7,000 is all, that's different scale. So it's a big deal. So thank you again so much for being here and for the really interesting presentation. Questions, as is usual, if you have a question, please take yourself off of mute. Sometimes there's the raise your hand icon. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So if just break in if you would like to ask a question, and if I'm not calling on you. Yeah, Pete, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Glenn. It was fun to listen to your presentation again. I really appreciate what you had to say about the importance of, well, I'll speak for myself, the importance for me as a returned Peace Corps volunteer to come home and be so interested in service in my community, but remain service-oriented internationally as well. And I'm so thankful that I have Rotary. I can't imagine my life if I hadn't found Rotary. And one of my wishes is that more Peace Corps volunteers would become engaged, that perhaps Rotary could do more to reach out to them, and then we could do more to show how fulfilling that engagement is for the return Peace Corps volunteer to get involved with Rotary. Do you have any ways or thoughts about how we could wave the flag a little bit more and draw attention one another to each other? How we could do that? I'll be the president of our club this next year, and I already feel a leaning towards promoting our club. But I also think the eClub would be an excellent place for return Peace Corps volunteers to come. This would be like so perfect. So anyway, I'd like to hear what you have to say, Glenn, about getting that connection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But honestly, I was not aware that there were eClubs. So I think this is a great way. It's so much easier to connect this way, and you don't have to actually go somewhere for a meeting or get up early for breakfast. Which in my case, my Rotary Club meets at 7 in the morning, which is, and we still do now, even though we're doing it remotely. Nonetheless, I think it's really opportune for us now more than ever to have that connection. We are undertaking a campaign to kind of, I call it a census, where we're going to really add, I think, members to our membership, if you will, and to our database. And in that process, we're going to actually personally reach out to as many of them as we can and talk to them about the different things that are going on, and that will include Rotary. And we'll ask them to consider joining their local Rotary Club, and if not an eClub. This is a pretty intensive effort for us. It's something we've been saving up our pennies to do for the last several years. We've got some funding that we think we can get most of it done with. And if it's successful as we have planned, we'll probably double the number of people that we're connecting with in our newsletters and our outreach. And in that process, we'll also be hopefully being able to connect them to their local Rotary Club and other service opportunities. So it's a huge step for us, and we're about ready to launch this program, this campaign, I should say. And I would hope that you'll actually see numbers added to your ranks as a result of that.
Thanks, Glenn. Chris Ann, did you have a question?
Yes, Glenn, is the volunteer timeframes always 2 years?
The standard service is 2 years, and plus there are 3 months of training, technical, language, and otherwise on the front end of that. So it's essentially 27 months total. And then volunteers are given the option, if they have work that they'd like to continue or extend for an additional year, that they can extend for an additional year beyond that, which I did in my case.
And I did too.
Thanks, Chris Ann. Glenn, I have a question. So, if budget, what I heard in your presentation was if national budget was more, many more Peace Corps volunteers could go out. So can you give us some idea of like what the budget for Peace Corps is to send 7,000 people out? Would it be a doubling of budget to send 15,000 people out, or are there scales of economy? Like what, if we reach out, I would personally like to reach out to senators, representative, maybe the White House, but having some data like that, I think would be really interesting or helpful. Look, for this small amount of money, look what we do on a global basis, and for this much more in funding we could do. Can you give us some ideas of numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with the first number. If you look at the screen, I think we have around 15 people, it looks like, maybe, or 14. And if all of you applied to the Peace Corps, only 2 of you, maybe 3 of you would get in, right? And you're all well qualified, it looks like. So, that's not fair. I mean, think about leaving all those people behind that really want to serve. And these are usually young adults, who are, I've heard many of them say, I've dreamt from the 8th grade that I wanted to join the Peace Corps, and it's been my lifelong dream, and have been rejected, have been, turned down for that opportunity. So we shouldn't do that, having so many qualified applicants that are interested. And then there are usually probably enough requesting countries that want Peace Corps volunteers or more volunteers in their country, that Peace Corps could easily double their numbers in the field. So the demand and supply, if you will, first and foremost, is there. The limit, the restriction is the budget. The budget is currently $450 million. And it is not kept pace with inflation over the years. If you even look back at the last 5 years or 10 years, the budget probably should now be around $550 million to $600 million, and it's just not anywhere close to where it should be. So that stagnant budget has also required Peace Corps to start cutting volunteer numbers. If we were to say, we could easily reach 10,000 volunteers in normal times, I would say, that would require a budget of around probably $650 million at this point in today's dollars. So we're not in a position right now, we believe, to advocate for that because we simply want to make sure Peace Corps survives. So our tactic at the moment is basically to protect Peace Corps funding where it is, and over the longer term, try to build the funding back up to levels that really bring it up to match with the potential that it has in terms of the applications.
Glenn, are a lot of those dollars for just travel back and forth, or what's the breakdown of budget in very large general categories, if you would, just out of curiosity?
Sure, no, that's great. The volunteer expenses themselves, they receive a modest living allowance. Usually it's around $400 a month. Travel back and forth to the country and other things. So that basically is a large chunk of it. But management and oversight of the posts over the field offices, as they have field offices in every country where volunteers serve. And there is a high level of staffing just based on the need of making sure volunteers have the safety and support apparatus there that they need, as well as the kind of program management. Most of the staff, though, are host country nationals, not expats. There is a significant budget for training as well, and that's usually the budget that gets cut when things aren't as good as they should be. But it needs to be as strong as possible because the volunteers are only more effective when they're trained well. So it's a gamut of things. What Peace Corps does not invest well in, because the funds usually aren't there, is what we call the third goal, the bringing the Peace Corps back home and here in the U.S. And so that's traditionally been underfunded in proportion to the other two goals that Peace Corps has, which are in the field. So it's a tough time right now for the Peace Corps.
Yeah, I hear that. If we wanted to contact, are you recommending two senators, U.S. House Representative, and the White House? Would that be a good?
Yeah, you're members of the House as well. And I'm going to, while we're talking here, also go to our website. But first and foremost, anybody's welcome to join National Peace Corps Association. You don't have to be a returned Peace Corps volunteer. You don't have to be anything other than if you have an interest in the Peace Corps. And so we welcome membership to anyone. And I'm just going to type in our short URL here, rpcv.org, and that's where you would go to learn more and sign up. And once you sign up, then you will get, and membership is free, by the way, we don't have dues anymore. We want it to be an open to all community, very inclusive and diverse. And once you sign up, you have the option to sign up, I think, specifically for advocacy newsletters. And in our normal newsletters, you will get otherwise information about advocacy and the current issues. And without a doubt, as we move into this August, September, October timeframe, our most urgent issue is going to be Peace Corps' budget for next year. And so we'll start putting out alerts and putting out requests for you to contact your member of Congress. And we actually make it quite simple for you. We actually put together kind of a draft message that you can send, and by just simply typing in your zip code, we will pull up the names of your member of the House of Representatives, as well as your two senators, which you obviously already know. But it will allow us then to just you put that data in there, and it pulls them up, and it actually sends the message to them on your behalf after you've tailored it and put your name in and changed it, or you can print it out and send it to them, or you can copy it and paste it into an email, however you want to do. It makes it really simple for you to advocate, and we take the issue that's the issue of the moment, if it's funding or if it's legislation, and we put that there in, so you don't necessarily have to know what the issues are, but you'll get a call to action from us to take action on a particular issue, and you can take it from there then.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Elke, I actually have a question for you. You said you were in Senegal for 6 years.
Yeah.
And Peace Corps operates in Senegal. Did you have connections with Peace Corps volunteers? Was your organization sort of similar, or can you just, tell us a little bit about your experience there and any interactions you had with Peace Corps?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to share that. And actually, then I'll feed into a question for Glenn that I
Oh,
have
great, thank you.
that I often got from the local community. As somebody who never did Peace Corps, I didn't feel quite able to answer. So my program was a 9-month gap year program in Dakar, Senegal. Senegal is one of the largest Peace Corps programs currently. I think it often is in the top 3 for number of volunteers, if memory serves me correct. And it's a huge program all over the country. And my program, Gap Year, was focused on integration in the local community and volunteer placements. And it was a learning before service model where we really focused on language instruction. And that's what Peace Corps does. So we often look to them for kind of models of how to train our students. I mean, I was working with 18, 19-year-olds, so a much different experience than Peace Corps, but we often look to them for points of learning with how to meet the community where they're at and how to enter a community respectfully and sustainably. And with my program, our students, they didn't quite receive the same amount of like skills training that Peace Corps volunteers do. So Peace Corps volunteers receive like a lot of technical expertise and training. And so oftentimes we really just told our students, your main goal is just to make friends and connect and to help out wherever you can, if that's being a language partner or if that's being more of the tech savvy person in a local organization and helping train them in on computers or Google Drive. And we travel throughout the country for about 9-month experience. And we'd often visit Peace Corps volunteers in their villages. And they're a great resource for our students. And it was interesting though, because living there and talking to the community members and spending a lot of time in remote areas, I often got a question of why the US government wasn't investing in local expertise and local employment. I think there was this assumption that the Peace Corps volunteers, wow, that's a lot of money. There's flights and there's a stipend and you bring them to Chess, the local training center location, for all these trainings. Why isn't the US government spending that money on local? So even though they were very thankful for the Peace Corps' contribution, I think sometimes they were confused why the money was spent on a volunteer and not somebody of the community, which kind of is my segue then into Glenn. So I would be curious, how could I respond to people about that? Or I don't know if you've ever encountered that question as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the topics of debate in our own community and around, and there's a lot of questions about that now in particular, and a lot of issues even related to the ongoing conversation right now about white savior complex, for example, and why volunteers even have to go to these, or why do we go to these countries, and how do we act when we're there, and what is it that we're doing, and so these are great debates that are going on right now in particular, but they have always, I think, been part of our is Peace Corps a development organization. We're doing development work. We're usually young professionals with no technical training really in preparation for what we're doing. So I think the first thing is, one is that Peace Corps works in countries only where they have been invited to work, and it is because the host countries request volunteers as part of their national plans and strategies, and they believe that they add value to the work that they're doing on a national level by having these types of exchanges and programs. And certainly, in my case, I felt that that was the case as well. I wasn't filling somebody's job per se. I was simply there to serve and support and engage as a community facilitator. We take that approach in our work. I think for the most part, volunteers do that. We're there, to simply be a part of the community and not to save it, not to help it, but really more just to say, how can we be a part of the community and help the community to thrive better. So the first, I think I would, is just the fact that we're there at the invitation of the host country to be a part of their programs. The second I would say is that because Peace Corps also has 3 goals, and one of those, being more kind of, if you will, development oriented, but It's about, bringing, some knowledge to bear in the countries that we work. But it's also about the second goal of helping create a better understanding of America and Americans on the part of our hosts in those countries, which is really important. And I'll just say, for example, a couple of years ago, I was in Guatemala visiting, and this was right on the heels of travel bans and all kinds of other things going on. And I was right there with those women in that picture, and they said the first things they said when I met up with them was, "Why do Americans hate us?" And I said, "Well, they don't." And I said, "Americans don't all hate you." I said, "Here's what's going on. There's a very vocal government right now that's speaking out on some issues, and it doesn't represent, as you know, how I feel about you, and it doesn't represent what most Americans feel about you and immigrants that are coming from your country." And so I think that part of our mission is really important and is very much accepted as well. And then the third goal, bringing that back home and sharing it here, I think is even more important now than ever. So I think, if you will, we have military leaders, we have business leaders here in the U.S., we have diplomats and others who say the Peace Corps is an integral component of all that we do internationally. It is to our benefit to have these types of programs where there is building of partnerships and building of relationships. And it's not just to America's benefit, it's to the global community, if you will.
Yeah, that's great. And I will speak from my own personal experience. That's often what I would answer with, is that kind of getting into ideas of soft diplomacy, that, I'm a better person because I know all these Senegalese people. And, I would love to fly the whole country of Senegal to the US, but it's not possible. And so by having one American go to their community and go to their village and get to know people.
Yeah,
Really
and
great.
I'm from a very small conservative town in the middle of Missouri, and I came back, and I know at least 4 or 5 people's lives were changed by my own kind of sharing my story, including my parents, my family, who ended up going down to Guatemala and visiting me, and just dramatically changed them. But I came back and spoke in my school and talked about this place called Guatemala that most of them had never even heard of, and 2 or 3 people actually ended up joining the Peace Corps as a result of that, and again, dramatically changed their trajectory too.
I just have a quick show of hands for people. Who's ever thought about, seriously or not, Peace Corps? I know I have. I'll raise my hand.
It's my retirement plan.
Retire, yeah. Well, I'd like to, Chrisanne and I were texting that we were unaware of the no upper age limit. I think that's really cool. So yeah.
I will say gray hair gets you so much respect oftentimes outside of the US. So
Right.
I met one volunteer who was, I think, in their 60s in Senegal. And she was this amazing, spry, woman with tons of energy. And she was so respected by the community.
Mm-hmm.
That's my dream.
Thanks, Elke. Any other questions?
If maybe I could just add one thing, Elke, you were talking about that relationship and where the resources go. I really echo what Glenn had to say. We were fortunate that we lived in such a remote island nation and on a remote island that we were paired with Save the Children. And so a lot of our Peace Corps volunteer training actually involved our counterpart, which was a local man and woman that Save the Children supported. So it was a beautiful relationship that we had, Peace Corps, Save the Children, and the local leaders. So there's lots of different models that happen, and I think we were just fortunate to have such an ideal situation. And so I know a lot of Peace Corps volunteers will bring that counterpart right alongside with them with the training. And as Glenn said, the impact is enormous. When we left in 1983 and I returned with our daughter in 2002 and just bumped into somebody on the street that had been in my nursery school classroom. And she came running up to us. And of course I didn't recognize her, but somehow the voice sounded a little familiar. And she went right away to my daughter because she looked like me back
20 years ago.
When I was young. And she was a little bit surprised to see how old I'd become, but she was no longer 5 years old either. So, but one of the things, as Glenn was saying, she went on and on and on about the impact that I had just being a white person uh, being in that classroom, helping the children learn some English. And she went on and on about how she made these different decisions based on that experience and had a new career. And anyway, it was like, okay, it made a difference to that one.
For that one person, yep. Thanks, Vicki. Stephanie, did you have Stephanie's be last question?
You know, I just know our time is getting so late. I was curious to know, and maybe just a quick yes or no, does the community where Peace Corps is placed, is there a monetary benefit to them? Do they get any kind of financial support from Peace Corps?
Well, not directly or significantly. Certainly, you know, the volunteers bring their spending there to the community, which is minimal because they're on a very small stipend. But indirectly, you know, they may work on economic opportunity projects that are a benefit to the community. So in my case, I'll just give you an example. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and the community member said, you know, great that you're helping us plant citrus trees here, but here's what we really need, and you can help us. And they said, we need electricity. And I said, I don't know anything about electricity, and that's not what Peace Corps does. And over a 1-year period, though, we were able to actually just work together, and by you know, thankfully, my ability to help open doors at some donors, we were able to do electrification project in that community, and you know, really change things in that little village as well. So there is an impact, if you will, economically that's felt, but no, there's not. Volunteers are discouraged from raising external funds for projects, and you know, putting a lot of funds into the communities themselves, because we don't want to be seen as, you know, kind of the cash cows coming to town with you know, deep pockets of money.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Glenn, as you know, and to the rest of the group here, the community has a commitment to the Peace Corps volunteer. In our situation, it was to provide housing and to sort of be the overlookers of us and our needs that we didn't have the infrastructure within the community to go fishing, or we didn't climb coconut trees and things like that.
Okay.
Well, Lee must have.
He did.
I know.
Not on a daily basis, though.
At least one time. You have to have.
Very, very little, John. And you had to know what you're doing to climb a coconut tree, and I admired those who did. And my, you know, father there, who was my age now, in his 60s, would climb the trees all the time and bring us these wonderful drinking coconuts.
That's awesome. Thank you. Glenn, if you have time for one more question, Olga does have a question.
Sure.
Olga grew up in the Netherlands, lives in southern Minnesota, and does some really neat work with the farming community and farmers through the state university system. And, oh, you're on mute. Olga. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Sorry. I had this little earpiece and it worked just until now. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. So, and I had a lot of background noise for some reason. Anyway, thank you for the presentation. I know some people who went abroad with the Peace Corps, and I've heard those stories, but I never really had this 10,000 foot overview. So I appreciate that. And one thing I was wondering is, as Glenn mentioned, the National Peace Corps, I thought, oh, national. So it is the United States. How about people in Canada or Europe or other places in the world who would like to volunteer? Where do they go? Do you work together with organizations there?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think over time we've become more global, if you will, as an organization. Even our community is scattered around the world. You know, I know of at least a couple of dozen return volunteers that are based in Guatemala and other countries, and we have worked from time to time together with other groups like the British volunteer programs and their alumni association. We've helped set up also a former Peace Corps volunteer, well, not Peace Corps, but other volunteer-based organizations in other countries and their alumni work networks as well. You know, we've not done that though, for example, to the extent Rotary has. So it is something I think that we will work on in the future, is to try to develop our international networks to more broadly collaborate with other organizations, including Rotary. But at the moment, you know, we're doing our best to kind of keep our community built and strengthened here in the U.S.
Thank you. Thanks for everything. Here, a few minutes over here, we end our Rotary meetings with four-way tests. So if everyone can take their microphones off of mute. And so the Rotary four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth?
The truth.
Is
Is it fair to all
To all
concerned?
concerned.
Will it build
Goodwill,
and
better friendships.
Chips.
Will it
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
We can all give Glenn a nice round of applause. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
joining.
Thank you.
All right.
Join us anytime, Glenn.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much. I really do enjoy these, and I hope the presentation was meaningful, and I'd love to join you again sometime. So thanks. Keep up the great work.
It sure was. Hey, just an administrative note. I got an email from Zoom that I think beginning sometime in July, they're requiring passwords on all of their links. So this regular link will change in some way. There'll be a password associated with it. And, you know, we'll get through that, but just to be aware of that in the upcoming meetings in case you don't click on it in the calendar invite each week.